Yeah, my name is Bob Fitrakis, and I run a website called thefreepress.org. I'm the executive director of the Columbus Institute of Contemporary Journalism, which the one good thing today with so few people, I do have free books. The one I wrote, What Happened in Ohio, and the one by Steve Friedman, which I think both do a really good job of detailing what may be obvious to some of you if you're in this panel room, that the privatization, really which is a bad word, really the corporatization by private vendors with secret source codes and computerized machines that are literally unknown, their operations to the actual people that work at the polls, causes great problems in society. I would just like to share some recent data. The book I wrote was on the 2004 election, which my new conclusion is when the state of Ohio, when 84 counties were actually using punch cards, it was easier to catch. It's now virtually undetectable. The only way to really catch it is in exit polls. And Jonathan will tell you, among other things, is we talked to him recently, Cliff Arnebeck and I, and he pointed out that what we saw in Ohio with a 5.4% shift towards the Republicans, the difference between the actual vote recorded and the exit polls, that pattern is occurring in other parts of the United States. But these are just some of the things. What we had been able to look at since 2004. Number one, we looked at the 2008 presidential election, which I've written about, and we found between 2004 and 2008, 1.25 million voters were purged in Ohio prior to the 2008 election. My institute, through grants that I received from the Threshold Foundation, working with the Tides, so I was glad they weren't blown up recently, gave us money to look at the voter purges. We collected all of these records. We determined about 250,000 of them were probably legitimately had died, had moved out of the state, which left 1 million people, which we were able to verify through surveys, random surveys. About 40% of them lived at the very same address and had no idea that they had been purged from the voting rolls. So we collected all this information in 2008 and made it available to anyone who wanted it. The only people that wanted it were the Obama campaign. The Republicans didn't stop by for the data. And most of those, the other group that came to get it was Acorn, which is now defunct, but who actually went door to door in the inner city. But we were able to show, and in most cases in Ohio, we tried to negotiate a consent decree with the Secretary of State at the time, but weren't really successful. And that was a Democratic Secretary of State, Jennifer Brunner. What we had come up with in that scenario was that if somebody's going to be purged, if voting is actually a right and we see it as a right, you should have at least two parties sign off on the purge, and they should actually shockingly state a reason. This appeared to be too radical a proposal for the state of Ohio. And in many cases, they did not accept that. But we thought if you're going to purge someone from the voting rolls, you might as well tell them why. And you should not leave it up to one party. But what we found out in 2010, it's gotten different, is they've now outsourced the voting rolls to private companies. And because it's Ohio, in 59 counties, those voting rolls are now maintained by a company called Triad. When it's not involved in elections, they're mainly organizing right-to-life events throughout the state of Ohio. The Rapp family, very conservatively, recently they were behind the heartbeat bill in Ohio, which would outlaw abortion at up 18 days and gave 2 sonograms in the state capitol. In one, they could barely detect any heartbeat at all. It didn't go quite as well as they wanted. You may know them, the Rapp family, because On their website, they're famous for what they're most proud of, the butterfly ballot, which they designed in Florida in 2000. So I always like to think, say the people at the Left Forum, or one group sponsoring a panel here of any of, say, a Marxist group, suddenly was allowed to control the vast majority of voter registration polls throughout the state of New York or any state. Would the Republicans not raise that as a legitimate transparency issue? So part of my frustration is not simply that you're getting numerous reports now of people who show up to vote throughout Ohio, and the data looks at more than 80% Democratic, and overwhelmingly in the central cities. And no one questions. It's always a computer glitch. But these computer glitches are operate not in a random way. The glitches are overwhelmingly against hardcore Democratic voters who most of us would know from the precincts they were glitched from. And this is same as in the pattern for 2004. For example, in Toledo alone, 40% of all the provisional ballots cast, and a large percentage, even a larger percent of the uncounted ballots that weren't accepted by the voting machine, in this case an OptiScan, came from the 4 heaviest Democratic wards with the highest black population. So you look at the data. What I've concluded is that in many ways it looks very similar to what used to be known as benign operations in the Third World conducted by the CIA. And those were benign because hundreds of thousands of people weren't being killed or assassinated. That was the actual term they used when they went before the Church Committee. And they said, look, we've done hundreds of these benign operations. And that's a term for ballot stuffing. That's a term for rigging elections because you create a false sense of legitimacy because the votes were counted. So when you have the systematic disenfranchising of people through a private company with clear ideological ties to the far right of the party, and now in Ohio, in 85 of the 88 counties, ES&S, which has connections in the past to the Republican Party in Diebold, now Premier, as well, has connections to the party. They control the voting apparatus. And the last thing, John Kasich, who was elected governor, the actual polls showed that he had lost, as well as the Attorney General. So the shot doctrine that's now being imposed upon Ohio, which I've written about SB 5 here. I live in Columbus. I've been down at the Capitol regularly. That shot doctrine essentially is being imposed by a governor who, in any other country, the election would have been called into question and we would be re-voting right now. A lot of this is premised on the assumption that the elections could never be stolen here and that the universal law of statistics did not apply in battleground states or anywhere else in the United States.